Councilmember Holloman. Councilmember Littleworth. Mayor Rotary.
Here, we have quorum. Let's rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular city council meeting held June 13th, 2022?
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Minutes are approved. May I have a motion to approve the warrant list?
So moved. Second?
Any comments or questions on the warrant list? None. Will the clerk please call the vote?
Councilmember Tapia. Councilmember Stolberg. Councilmember Stone. Councilmember Bloomberg. Mayor Rotary.
Aye, 5 ayes, no nays, and the warrant list is approved. We'll continue to the report of the mayor. I have no appointments this evening. I have no proclamations this evening. Earlier this year, the city was truly delighted to welcome a four-legged member of the police department, our first community service in Wildestone. In preparation for his arrival, community members and students at North Shore School District 112 and Mountain Park High School submitted names for a community vote, giving Officer Vinnie Duke his official name. Since his arrival in March, Officer Duke has become an integral part of our team, working diligently with his handlers, Officers Mike Ledeski and Darren Graff, providing support where appropriate on service calls, helping high school students weather the stress of finals week, and more. He even met with all third graders at their annual visits to City Hall, and he truly was the star of the show. In his role as our community service and wellness dog, Duke will continue to support these and other community engagement and crisis intervention initiatives. Though he'll primarily focus on situations where he can reduce stress and fear in individuals who have been victims of a crime or another emergency situation, he'll also be out and about in our community, stopping by schools and community events, including National Night Out on August 2nd. He even has his own collectible police department trading card. I need one of those. We are delighted this evening to officially administer the oath of office to Officer Vinnie Duke. So, Officer Duke, please join us. Does he know how to raise his right paw?
They were practicing.
I kind of want to stand for this, but. Aww.
All right, let's get it. All right. I, Vinnie Duke, solemnly affirm that I will faithfully discharge the duties of community service and wellness dog for the city of Highland Park, Illinois, according to the best of my ability. On my honor, based on my training, provide emotional and physical wellness services to the residents and guests of Highland Park in their time of. I also affirm the Illinois Association of Chiefs, NAACP, your principal of public safety, and will perform my duties in support of them. Congratulations. You gotta sign your oath, make it official.
Oh, is that awesome? Can we do that next time instead of signing?
Yes, Adam wants to do a paw print.
Fantastic.
He's like, I'm not sure about this. Aww. Steve, you have the best view of all. All right. Well, good job, Keita. Good job, Officer. Is he okay? Whoa, okay. We can't wait to watch Duke continue to contribute positively to our community for years to come. Before we move on, thanks are due to a number of individuals who have been instrumental in bringing Duke to Highland Park, including City Manager Gita Newkirk, Chief of Police Lou Jogman, Deputy Chief Bill Bonaguidi, Sergeant Tony Galati, Officers Reyes Montemayor, and of course Duke's two trained handlers, Officers Graff and Lodeski. Many thanks to the Paws and Stripes College at the Broward County Sheriff's Office, which trains service dogs at their local county jail through a unique second chance program for rescue dogs and inmates. Closer to home, we'd also like to recognize Highland Park Veterinary Clinic, which will be providing general veterinary services to the city to support Duke's continued good health. Many thanks to Dr. Jacob Cohen and Dr. Allison Fink. We also recognize Nulo Pet Food, which is generously donating Officer Duke's food in partnership with Pet People / Hollywood Feed. We greatly appreciate their support in choosing the best, healthiest food for Duke. I believe Officer Duke will stay at City Hall in the Rotunda for the time being, if anyone would like to come by and meet him. He is just a lovely addition to the police department. So thank you for this great initiative, Chief, and thank you to his handlers for taking good care of our newest officer. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to your next opportunity to see Officer Vinnie Duke at the 4th of July parade. He is our Grand Marshal, and this year's theme is We Are All Superheroes. What is your superpower? Community. So after 2 years, I know we're all looking forward to Highland Park's Independence Day celebrations on July 4th. The fun begins with the Children's Bike and Pet Parade at 9:30, just before the 4th of July parade steps off at 10 a.m. Follow the parade through downtown Highland Park and spend the afternoon at Fourth Fest in Sunset Woods Park from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. with activities, live music, and food presented by the Park District of Highland Park. The Bitter Jester Music Festival Grand Finale Concert at Walters Field begins at 3:45 p.m. and fireworks at Walters Field will begin at about 9:30 p.m. For a full schedule of the day's events, please visit enjoyhighlandpark.com/July 4. As a reminder, city administrative offices will be closed and refuse collection will be delayed in observance of the holiday. We look forward to seeing everyone at the parade. And with that, we will move on to business from the public. This is for citizens wishing to be heard regarding items not listed on tonight's agenda. I see no members of the public, so we will continue on to our scheduled business. Items 1 through 5 have been grouped together for omnibus consideration. I am seeking a motion to approve items 1 through 5.
So moved.
Second.
Any comments or questions on 1 through 5? Hearing none, will the clerk please call the vote?
Councilmember Tapia.
Aye.
Councilmember Stolberg.
Aye.
Councilmember Stone.
Aye.
Councilmember Bloomberg.
Aye.
Mayor Rotering.
Aye, 5 ayes, no nays. Items 1 through 5 have been approved. We have no other business on this agenda. Do we have any business from the council? Hearing none. Any business from city staff? None. With that, I'm seeking a motion to adjourn this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right, and we are adjourned of the city council meeting. I will now call to order the committee of the whole meeting for the city council of Highland Park, June 27th, 2022. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Councilmember Tapia.
Present.
Councilmember Stolberg.
Here.
Councilmember Stone.
Here.
Councilmember Bloomberg.
Here.
Councilmember Heilman. Councilmember Littlewer. Mayor Rotering.
Here, we have a quorum. May I have a motion to approve the minutes from the May 23rd, 2022 Committee of the Whole meeting?
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The minutes are approved. Under scheduled business, we're having a conversation this evening regarding the possibility of a revised payment in lieu fee policy. The Housing Commission recommended the payment in lieu be increased from $125,000 per unit to $185.4 thousand per unit, and I recognize Community Development Director Joel Fontaine for this evening's presentation.
Thank you, Mayor. This presentation at the Committee of the Whole is about the fiscal year 2023 payment in lieu of affordable housing fee. As part of our budget preparation process, we look at various fees and charges in the city's annual fee resolution to see if there are any need to have changes and make recommendations accordingly. Given the policy aspects of this particular fee, we started early this year so as not to have too much on the council agenda during budget season. Thank you. The Housing Commission, as such, the city staff started in May and presented in June, on June 1st Housing Commission meeting, and asked for the Housing Commission's thoughts and consideration on what they might recommend as a payment in lieu fee for 2023. As you indicated, Mayor, they recommended an increase from 125 to 185,400 to represent the average government subsidy from all sources needed to acquire and bring online an affordable unit through the city's scattered site housing program since 2018. So just some background about the fee in lieu. In the zoning code, section 150-2125B, an excerpt from that talks about what the cash in lieu is. It's the minimum per unit amount that shall be determined by the city council based on an estimate of the cost of providing an affordable housing unit and shall be reviewed and modified periodically by city council. When the program initially started in 2003 with the inclusionary housing program being adopted through the zoning code, a $100,000 per unit inclusionary fee was adopted at that time. That was the program outset. There was no programmatic information to go on, but they used various methods, including sales prices and such, to try to come up with. In 2008, that was increased to $200,000 per unit at the peak of the housing boom, and actually just before it started to crash. In 2013, it was reduced to $125,000 per unit after the Great Recession had receded and recovery was ensuing, but housing prices had not recovered certainly, and so it was reduced. Just a staff note, the fee in lieu is not the sales price of a unit that one acquires. Rather, it's an estimate of a subsidy needed to acquire and make a unit permanently affordable. So that's important because we do, through the scattered site program, acquire units at a particular price, do things to them, and then sell them. So it's not the acquired price, it's the net, if you will. So, the overarching criteria used in the program since its inception was set forth by the Housing Commission in 2003. They had three tenets on how to think about setting a fee in lieu. That it should be the amount, it should relate to the cost of making a unit of market rate housing affordable to a household at a target level. And they're referring to income there, but they say it generically. Two, the amount should be meaningful but reasonable so as not to impose an inappropriate burden on developers and or landowners. A bit of balance there as well. And three, the methodology should be simple, easy to communicate and understand, and based on objective and verifiable assumptions. So let me talk a little bit about what the funds from the payment in lieu are used for. They're used for, in this program, for its scattered site affordable housing sub-program, if you will, of our affordable housing program. And that program in and of itself has some tenets and it has some essentially purposes that it's trying to achieve. And there are four main ones: to preserve a diverse housing stock in the community, to mitigate units in disrepair or that lack investment to avoid blight and the loss of the units that could reasonably be made permanently affordable. Three, to implement repairs and upgrades to ensure the home is in good working order and free from near-term unexpected costs related to key amenities and systems. So when the unit is acquired, made affordable, and then sold to an eligible household, the goal is to make sure that that unit doesn't have any near-term issues that would require additional resources from that household. And four, of course, as any good grant-making program does, leverage housing trust fund grants to acquire and make permanently affordable dwelling units throughout the community. So the goal is not just to use our own money or the city's own derived money, but also to leverage those monies with other government resources to achieve affordable housing throughout the community, and the program has done that.
Tony has a question.
I have a question just for clarification as to number two. I understand that. I acknowledge that that's part of the goal of the payment in lieu, but the money in the housing trust fund that is acquired from a payment in lieu, as I understand it, is not to be used for maintenance of existing units already online. Is that correct? In other words, the money is supposed to be used to acquire a unit and bring the unit up to whatever level of livability it should be at. And that's what number 2 speaks to.
Yes, through our scattered site program, that's how that program has been administered, yes. So it's not just merely searching for the turnkey, move-in, ready home, but rather a home that's appropriate that also may need these types of additional investments so that we don't lose that home. There aren't people really making affordable homes throughout the country. And so why would you say, why don't you just go for the turnkey, move-in, ready? Well, those homes aren't likely to get knocked down anytime soon. So those homes are going to take care of themselves. So one of the sub-policies of this program for the last 20 years has been, hey, don't just get those move-in ready ones. If you see homes in distress that are reasonably within an ability to close that gap to bring them back to productive use for long-term, let's do that.
You did one on Rosemary a few years ago that came out beautiful.
Right.
And
Right.
so some of what happens there too is that's also objectives of the leveraging funds as well. So HUD has lots of other goals too that get brought into the program as we leverage.
Right. What I'm distinguishing is that the Housing Trust Fund, other monies may be used, for instance, to replace windows on properties the city of Highland Park owns and manages through the Housing Commission. Those funds that are acquired by a payment in lieu are not supposed to be used for that. They're supposed to be used to bring new units online.
That's correct. We do not, we have not used the Housing Trust Fund, as you're saying, to do repairs or improvements on the city-owned properties that are affordable, like Piers. These funds were not used
That's
for
what
that.
I'm getting at.
That's correct.
Corporation Council wants to.
Mr. Fontaine is correct, as this is the policy, but just so you know, your code simply states that the funds are to be deposited into the Affordable Housing Trust Funds, and then it refers to general purposes.
Well, respectfully, the money that is collected has a policy stated, which is that that money is to be used for purposes of providing an equal or a greater opportunity for an off-site unit that is not built.
It's set forth in a separate section of the code in 33-1133.
Okay.
And so each year, when we come in, the administration comes in to make recommendations for budget allocations. We make recommendations for the scattered site program, which has these tenants as the purpose. Housing Trust Fund monies could be used for other affordable housing initiatives, but only with the approval of the City Council at budget time. So each year, we make a recommendation for scattered site program of X dollars, and then that's what those funds get used for. It's a stated purpose fund.
Just a quick question. Thanks, Mayor. Joel, besides the fee in lieu and the demo tax, is there anything else that goes into that housing trust fund?
Demo permits as well.
The permits
but that's a
associated
smaller
with
amount, yeah.
the demo fee?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. The main funding source is the demo tax and payment in lieu, but payment in lieu is very intermittent, not regular. And it has large payments and then none, and then large, that kind
But
of.
the demo tax has gone
That's
down
the-
substantially over the years, too.
Yes, we've had fewer demolitions than we had in the past. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
That's correct.
And can you talk about SEPA and SEPA's role within all of this, or is that coming later?
I will talk about that later, but
Okay.
SEPA is our land trust, if you will, community land trust, and we've worked with them since the beginning, actually as part of, we kind of created them, and they've grown capacity-wise and such, and the grants that we make go to our community land trust, and they have become expert in leveraging those funds with other government monies to secure and make permanently affordable housing in our community.
Andres?
Yeah, has there ever been a study if we're getting a one-to-one correlation between the units that did not get built and there was cash in lieu, and then we can look back and say, well, the same number of people were able to be afforded affordable housing because of the cash in lieu, the fact that we had given up the actual physical unit in the building?
Well, as you'll see later in my presentation, we're able to leverage more than one unit with each payment in lieu. And so if I can come back to that to answer you specifically, that would be appreciated. Okay.
And Joel, just
Yeah.
maybe, and I know the from start to finish probably took, oh wow, maybe three years. I remember when Planner Leiter was here, we did do a roundtable where we had local developers, builders, bankers, and we did look at the feasibility of not only what the fee in lieu was getting us, but we also took into consideration, we wanted the developers to still feel that we want them to develop here, but we all expressed that the affordable housing was very, very key to our policy, and we went through things like ROI and other things, and we did the analysis of at 150 grand, at 25% instead of 20%. And really, especially as you get into some of the larger stock of housing that we've had over the last couple of years, the delta really didn't even move the needle too much on the developer's ROI or things like that. So we did put a lot of time into that.
I think that was 2019, was that what was
That was
referenced in the
2019,
report?
yeah.
That's when it was
So-
completed.
Right, but
Yeah.
it started.
Correct,
Right.
it started before that, yes,
Right.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Correct.
Kim also has
Thank you,
something
Mayor.
she'd
Sure.
like to add. Thanks.
Just two quick things. For those who don't know, SEPA is Community Partners for Affordable Housing. The time frame for building a unit when we get the fee in lieu is longer generally because we've got to take the, if a builder just built the unit, it would be done. If we take the money instead, we take the money either when the unit's partly done or when the unit's fully done. And then it may take a year or 2 years by the time we get the money into the trust fund and then make a grant out to SEPA. And then the unit gets built or purchased and rehabbed. So I just want to make sure
That is correct. It is slower than what would otherwise be from the development itself, typically, yes.
Thanks.
I just had a follow-up to Adam's point. In that study, was there ever a sense that there was ever a deal breaker, like the developer said, this is too high for me, I'm not...
Sometimes,
Oh,
yes,
yeah.
especially, I think our code requires it in buildings of 4 units or more?
5 and more.
5? And, when you've got a project like Albion, and they're content not only putting units into the plan, but paying a large chunk of money into the fund, it's a little different than when you've got someone converting or building from scratch 4 or 5 units. Yeah, so there is some sense that at times it is a deal breaker, and I've gotten complaints, but at the same time, I don't think what we've accomplished with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and our program is enough that it turns any high percentage of developers away. And to me, and I've done my share of development, it's really not, from what I've seen, a deal breaker. It's just how much less money you're going to make, and can you live with that threshold?
Tony?
There was a comment made relevant to this by a member of the Housing Commission, Brad Dennison, who at one time worked in the development community, and it was a comment that echoed a group of 4 developers who had talked at the municipal conference back when it was at Ravinia before the pandemic. The important element of a payment in lieu is that it be established, that it be clear. Developers want to know what is expected of them up front rather than things that are soft, subject to change on the way. So when a development is recommended by the Plan Commission, approved by housing, or meets whatever zoning criteria is necessary in a PUD, they know what's expected of them. So if we raise the payment in lieu to a particular amount of money, developers know what is expected of them in terms of the number of units they have to build and what relief is there in terms of a payment in lieu and what that payment is going to look like.
Those are all very good points, and I will point out that a couple of things just based on the conversation. One, I like to characterize what this program does as follows with regard to housing. We've clearly seen lots of housing develop. It's between 2015, when we changed the code for downtown to allow greater height and density, and development has occurred. So we have seen that. We've seen developments that are smaller, meaning fewer units, which have, as you pointed out, Councilmember Stolberg, a bit higher burden at times in terms of this program, and then the larger ones, which is less. So we've really seen the full gamut of development, and that's in part due to the attractiveness, of course, of our community, but also the housing market in general has been good for those types of units during this time. What I would say is that if you want to know, well, what does this do? It's not that it doesn't have any effect. Like Councilmember Stolberg mentioned, it does change perhaps what you're going to get in terms of rate of return. And so money seeks the highest rate of return. So on balance, you know, what this would do, the added cost would say you go into a housing recession a little bit sooner and you come out a little later. Does it say that this is so much it's going to prevent development? Absolutely not. And we've demonstrated that as a city through the last 5 to 7 years.
Adam?
One more comment that I think is, you know, for people watching or who may not realize, we're not just putting the burden of this fee on the developer. I mean, I'm sure you'll address it, Joel, but let's remember that the developers get a density bonus too.
Yes.
And the one thing our code cannot allow us to do, we can give variation for height or color or whatever. We can't give a variance or relief to allow more units per dwelling or, you know, per acre. So there is, when we did that roundtable, that factored into it, that bonus unit, and that's a developer decision. Sometimes they say, hey, it's cheaper to just pay in lieu, or sometimes they're happy with the bonus unit. And just if I may, one more thing on the scattered site, most of the affordable units that come on board are 1 and 2 bedrooms. And where the scattered site really, in my opinion, fills a need is for someone who a condominium 1 or 2 bedroom really doesn't work. Whether it's a lot of kids or a divorced parent or a parent living with a mother or a father who's a widow or a widower. So that scattered site really does play a key role in filling a niche that most developments don't bring on board in terms of 3 bedrooms. And we've been told that that is, you know, something that is in huge demand. So when we see one coming on in a development or the opportunity with a scattered house, I think it's tremendous.
And also the scattered site program really balances the inclusionary housing program, right? There are actually 2 different programs within our overarching policy on housing and affordable housing. So it does complement well. The community is a largely built out community made up of single family detached homes. So the scatter site really gets at inclusionary housing throughout the community in that type of housing type. And then the inclusionary housing is going to be whatever the market sees as needing to be developed in our community. A portion of that will be affordable based on your zoning. So they do really complement each other, and they feed into each other. And during recessionary times with one, we could still be producing with the other. And then when the other, we can benefit in that way as well as we have been in the last 5 or so years. So back to the presentation. Oh, and one other thing, there was talk about there are developer cost offsets that are important. In the policy that the council has adopted and supports and what we've administered over the years is we have, for the affordable units, you don't have to pay impact fees. You get the proportion of your units that are affordable, you get that as a discount on your building permit fees. This council made that clear. So that it was easy to calculate. Thank you. That really helped and was an improvement in the code from what it had been. You also get the density bonus, as you said. So we can go through this. For the affordable units, you get 1.5 market rate units for each affordable unit that you provide. Now, this council made that clear and made that by right. It didn't used to be. So again, all of these things flowed out of the work that we did and that Councilmember Stolberg was talking about and others on the council were talking about. So those are important cost offsets. There's no question about it, and that really did help the program. Further, in terms of the demo tax, the council had made the choice to dedicate the full amount of the demo tax to the Housing Trust Fund. It used to be only 2/3, and now it's 100%. Okay, so back to the fee in lieu. So how do we inform a fee in lieu? Well, we have a 2-part methodology that's been used over the course of time for the program. One is there's a sales price approach. The other is program experience. Obviously, the initial setting of the fee didn't include program experience, but from there on in, it did. So the sales price approach looks at the estimated total subsidy required based on market sales prices by housing type. And the housing type in question, which we'll talk about a little bit more, is single-family detached home. That represents most of our community. Program experience is the total subsidy experience for the city's scattered site program. And we use various time periods to inform that. In this case, we use the 2018 to 2021 time period. So the methodology have some underlying assumptions. So for the sales price approach, you have the target housing type. Single-family detached home. That's the target housing type. Affordability, 80% of area median. Acquisition target price, the top price of the lowest sixth of home sales approximates an appropriate target price. This is the underlying assumption. And then program experience, in this case, we're using program experience from 2018 to 2021. And those are the actual program experiences. So other things to consider when you're thinking about a payment in lieu, what the fee represents. It's an estimate of the cost of providing an affordable unit. The target unit type acquired, single-family detached, and the Housing Trust Fund. It's an important source of revenue for the Housing Trust Fund. These are things you should consider. In addition, we suggest that you consider the leverage obtained through the scattered site grant making program we talked about. Now here, I just want to explain a little bit about this because I think there was a question from Councilmember Tapia that was on this point. So Housing Trust Fund, that's HTF here as abbreviated, the grant monies that we give out to obtain an affordable unit from 2018 to 2021 was $67,500. Okay, and we were able to leverage a unit out of that through SEPA and their ability to gain other government sources to subsidize and get online those homes. So currently, the program is able to get about or leverage about 1.85 units per payment in lieu, per $125,000 payment in lieu, which is the current payment in lieu fee. SEPA reports, and we obviously get continual reporting from SEPA as they are not only a grantee of scattered site grants, but also operating grants. And so they report that going forward, 2023 and looking forward, that it's likely, due to changes in the funding environment, that there's going to be a greater need or more dollars needed from the Housing Trust Fund to accomplish the same as we have in the past. Thus the $85,000 per unit. So that's some programmatic information to consider and to be informed about as when you're thinking about a fee in lieu.
Tony
yeah.
has a comment.
Very quick question. When we talk about the amount per unit, I know we're mostly talking about, or maybe I shouldn't assume that, you're talking about single-family home scattered site units?
Correct.
Or
This is
all
all
units?
scattered site. This is scattered site, existing single-family homes being acquired, improved, brought online as
Okay.
permanently affordable.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks.
More to consider. The code's incentive and penalty structure. Now, this is a little bit nuanced and subtle, but the code's payment in lieu fee is $125,000. But as Councilmember Stolberg pointed out earlier, one of the conversations council had over the years was, well, what percentage of the units needs to be affordable? And so our code says it's 20% prior to any of the mitigations that are applied. And when you do apply those mitigations, such as the bonuses, if you will, for market rate units, you bring that number down to about 15.5% roughly. So this is why the fee in lieu, if someone were not to provide any units on site, the fee in lieu is effectively 1.29 times what the actual nominal amount is, because they're going to be required to give you 20% instead of 15.4%. So that's what I mean by the penalty structure. That is intended by the code. That is not a mistake or an error. That is intended.
Right.
Because the code wants on-site units, and there's a penalty as you don't provide.
Right.
Okay, more considerations. Inflation. So the past fee amounts at adoption and then adjusted for inflation are shown in the top portion of this slide. So in August of 2003, the first fee in lieu, $100,000, adjusted to today's dollars is $158,000. In May 2008, after the housing boom there, the fee of $200,000 at that time is adjusted to today's dollars at $270,000. And lastly, the March 2013 fee in lieu of $125,000, which is today's current fee in lieu, adjusted for inflation from March 2013 to now, it represents $157,000. Other things to consider: past fee amounts versus program experience average total subsidy required. Okay, as we talked about before, what is this? It's the cost of an affordable unit. Well, what do we mean? Some estimate of the cost, the subsidy. In May 2008, the $200,000 fee was set higher than the average total subsidy experienced from 2005 to 8 during that time period, and was $185,000. In March 2013, the $125,000 fee was higher than the $112,000 average total subsidy from 09 to 12. The Housing Commission this year recommended respectfully to the council that it be set at what the average total subsidy was for 2018 to 2021, thus the $185,400. They added a little level of precision they hadn't added. So looking at the two approaches, the methodology, as I mentioned before, we got the sales price approach, and then you have your program experience approach, right? And so to inform this. So we look at the sales data approach. The city's current fee in lieu of $125,000, it's not sufficient to cover the total subsidy gap or cost to bring an affordable unit online. About $156,000 per unit is the estimated subsidy required to acquire a single-family home at the top sales price in the lower sixth of all single-family home sales in our community. That lower sixth, top sales price of the lower sixth, that was from the beginning when the Housing Commission thought, how are we going to set that price point of where we're talking about? So that's been consistent throughout time, as we've used that as a reference point. So I want to note that, of course, and to remind you that, note that the sales price doesn't include costs of repairs and upgrades associated with bringing an affordable unit online, as we had mentioned was desirable, and other things like that. So this method does not include that. It just says that this was the sales price. So the sales price that's said in the sales data approach implies this gap of $156,000. When you look at program experience, which is, well, what did our program or grant making achieve, and what was the government subsidies from all sources? That was $185,000. And that's from 2018 to 2021, and through our scattered site program, and that's the purchasing of single-family detached homes and making them affordable and improving them with reasonable repairs and upgrades so that they don't have any near-term unexpected costs for the new owner. So the city's program since 2018 has been able to leverage its grant money sufficient to acquire and bring online about 1.85 units at the current fee in lieu price of $125,000. So key policy questions. How should leverage of other governmental funds be taken into account when deriving a payment in lieu fee? And then is the fee in lieu sufficient to cover the estimated cost of providing an affordable unit, or a sufficient amount of the estimated cost to provide an affordable unit? The Housing Commission's recommendation was to increase it to $185,400. And I'm open for any questions that council might have.
Thanks. The letter that Betsy Lazar and Janet Swartz sent to the Housing Commission seemed to imply that their original intent as the architects of the beginning of all of this was to provide the full amount needed. Mm-hmm. And I guess my question is, so over time, did things change, that there were other grant opportunities and other resources that maybe, because it seems like there's a little bit of a contradiction there, or maybe I'm just misinterpreting their email to it.
And this has been very difficult over time, just the conversation, because I think people are talking about different things.
Because I wanted us to get that on the table, because I didn't want it to
Right.
be an after-the-fact conversation
Yes.
through email.
Yes. And actually, Commissioner Dennison, at one point was on the Housing Commission, he's a current member, but at one point during the conversation had thought that perhaps we were trying to get the sales price to acquire a unit, as
Right.
opposed to the net government subsidy after you sell that house. So we are definitely not looking to get the sales price of the unit.
Okay.
And so that's for sure. But the total government subsidy, which I believe is what's being referred to there, is what they were referring to in my, and that what
So
makes
not
sense
just
when you
the
look at the
city's
data.
piece, but all told.
Correct.
Got it.
The
Thank you.
cities and the leveraged, that's correct. And as you see here in '08,
Okay.
it was actually set a little higher than the total subsidy from all government sources. And in 2013, it was set a little higher than the total, programmatic experience from all government sources.
Tony?
So you talked towards an issue that just came before us at our last city council meeting, which is interesting. When we determine that there has to be essentially 20% of the total market rate units, an equivalent in affordable units, are we talking about the total number of market units that may be built given what the zoning is, or the total number of market rate units proposed by an application? And
That's a good question.
so that question came up with the last matter that was before us, where the developer intentionally was going to build far fewer units than that piece of property could bear under the zoning applicable.
Mhm.
As I understand it, that meant he was responsible for fewer affordable units on site.
Right.
Does that affect the payment in lieu that is then required on a per unit basis not built on site?
That's a very good question, and it's an important one to understand. So thank you for asking that. So our program and the way the law is set up applies to the proposed project, not your theoretical ultimate density that you could possibly achieve. So that project proposed a certain number of units. Of that certain number of units, you need to have a percentage that's affordable, okay? And so it varies. The number of units that are affordable will vary on the size of the project, not what the zoning will allow, if you will, under those conditions. Do you see what I'm saying?
I do.
You could choose to take advantage of the full density allowed by the zoning code or not, and then your number of units would vary depending on the size of the proposal you're making.
But so would your bonus units.
This is correct. Yes. And so what you should know is that essentially, if you're doing all units on site, let's just use that as an example. So whether you're doing the 20 or the higher number, the percentage affordable is going to roughly be the same. So that's the requirement, okay? And your bonuses are the same, 1.5 per unit affordable made. So if you're proposing a development with fewer units, you're going to have fewer bonuses and your number of affordable units will be less as well. But it's not less as a proportion to the project, and that's important. That's consistent, depending on whether you're a small one or a large one.
That's essentially what I'm asking.
Right.
And so this comes up under circumstances when a developer chooses to develop larger but fewer units on site than the zoning allows, we are getting fewer affordable units either on site or paid in lieu, either
In
way.
absolute numbers, yes.
And the only circumstance that happens is when larger, essentially luxury units are being proposed. But there's no accommodation for that in the loss of affordable units that are resulting from that.
I think a question that gets raised, though, is, as we approach this potential revisiting of the master plan, how many opportunities are there? So what's the opportunity cost versus the potential for having other benefits from people from that housing coming in? That's like a whole model that you almost want to run to see what's out there in terms of those types of buildable sites, and then what
Oh,
the
yeah.
likelihood is. Go ahead.
No, I think you're exactly right, and I'm just racking my small brain between sitting on the council and being on the PDC. I can think of two occasions where, developers tend to try and
Maximum.
max
Right.
and fight us for that.
And that's why we rezoned.
So
to
your
increase
point is
density.
appropriate because it just came before us in what I think is a fantastic development.
Right.
But by them building small or bigger, less units, in effect, the housing trust fund or the units actually gets hurt
Right.
because they're not building as many. But it's so rare.
But there is relief for that we have in the code as it's written and happened with this development. The number that we settle on tonight or ultimately vote on, that's a minimum. So if you get a situation where you're coming up short in terms of the potential for affordable units, we have the ability to account for that or accommodate that if we want to, and if the economics of the day and the circumstance require or suggest that that's possible.
Do you see that as a public benefit?
I do, and interestingly,
And that might be one way
this
to-
developer it was put to that developer by the Housing Commission. They didn't find 125 was adequate. They sort of judicially, if you will, increased or made a recommendation of 150, which they also found to be too small, but which we adopted, which we had the authority to do, and which the developer had indicated to the commission and to us he was willing to pay.
And they felt that was in exchange for losing the
Number of
extra units.
Exactly. So that's how that gets accommodated, I think, if we need to.
But in that case, the Housing Commission felt they would have liked to have been higher. So.
Yes, so they don't really have the authority to make that recommendation,
Right.
and
They
as they
just
say, it
make a
was
statement.
outside, they approved
Outside the purview of
they approved the plan. They added that as language. Our commissions do occasionally send their thoughts and recommendations about important related matters to us, which we can ignore essentially as dicta. But it was an opportunity to address that shortfall, which the developer was willing to accommodate and able to accommodate.
Yeah, and that recommendation is non-binding on the city council, of course. And so the Housing Commission did do that, and sometimes commissions do that so as to not deny or not recommend denial for the reason, but rather say, hey, this is a fine inclusionary housing plan, but if with the condition that this be more, but we don't know when we defer to you, meaning the council.
Right.
So I think that was the spirit in which they were trying to make that recommendation. But having said that, back to what you were saying about Ms. Lazar's memo.
Right.
It's about the total government subsidy.
And not just the city's portion.
Correct.
Can you go back to the 2 points that you'd like us to try to resolve this evening? Thanks.
So the key policy questions when setting a fee is, okay, how should this leverage be taken into account? Should it be the total amount, or should it be some portion of it? Should it be more? Last 2 times it was a little more, actually, right? And is ultimately what you're trying to do is the fee in lieu sufficient to cover the estimated cost of providing an affordable unit? I will, though, hark back to the overarching criteria from the first Housing Commission's thoughts on this. And they did mention, the amount should relate to the cost of a unit, market rate being made affordable. And they mentioned also that it be meaningful but reasonable so as not to impose an inappropriate burden on development community, and that the methodology should be simple and easy to communicate and understand. I think the methodology is straightforward and understandable in both cases, the sales data approach and the programmatic approach. I think that's good to have both those pieces of information to make a decision. But certainly it's up to council how to make that decision and how to strike that balance. This was the kind of the tenets with which the program had started. It's certainly not in code or anything. This is policy as the program has been administered over time for yours to take or leave as you see fit.
What are people's thoughts also about the revisiting every 5 years versus?
Just going to say that.
There you go.
Thank you. When
Sure.
you ask thoughts, I don't mean to jump on it.
Yep.
But Joel, the program experience approach, is that new?
No.
I just don't remember seeing. Okay. I think that's great. And as we sit here in the environment that we're in today with rising interest rates, huge inflation, facing a potential housing slowdown and recession, we're almost like the Fed. We're looking at a lagging indicator. And I think whether it's how we adopt it through the code or through just a policy, I was going to say the exact same thing, Mayor. I think if we're going to undertake, whether it's a combination of both approaches, I think the one thing that we heard loud and clear when we revised the code a couple years ago was just tell us what you want.
We've got to have predictability.
Right. So if we, let people know that we're going to revisit this every 5 years or 4 years or 6 years or whatever it is, it's not just to make it look like we're trying to raise fees. If the economic environment warrants a reduction like we've done in 2013, or in 2008 rather, I think it lets them know that we're paying attention to that too. So I'm glad you brought that up, because I wrote the same thing down, is we should make it procedurally. We work so hard at our budget and everything else to let this thing go for years and years. We're probably a little late on this one.
Right.
Given what the economy has been doing the last few years.
Right.
And now we're going to look to raise it into a time, which I'm supportive of, but into a time where we may be sitting here sooner than later saying, we've had a slowdown, mortgage rates are expensive, what do we need to do to reattract development? So I'm fully in support of
Do you want to have the
that.
market-driven trigger versus a just 3-year, 5-year, 1-year?
Trigger like what? Housing starts,
Right,
interest rates,
Inflation.
CPI or
inflation data,
yeah.
something like that?
Uh-huh.
I don't think it would hurt, and I think from a developer standpoint, if we are looking at this more frequently than less frequently, I think that shows good faith. I think that makes Highland Park desirable to let developers know we're not just sitting here and saying it's 185 grand.
Or does that then limit the predictability because they don't know when we're going to be changing it? Or are they going to wait us out and see if we will be changing it, you know? I mean,
Well, money's money, and, you know, I would defer to you, sir, but I would think that a developer, the fee is based on when the application comes in and what we have on the code at the time,
was just gonna-
correct?
it's not reactive. Joel would like to jump
Oh,
in.
sorry.
I would like
Then
to
Kim,
just make,
then-
yeah, I would like to make mention of that. I would say that, I think as a matter of policy, you know, the way the policy is currently in the code, I think it makes a lot of sense because the housing market is really, it can be a volatile thing or fairly stable depending on what's going on. So just being attentive to it and realizing when inflection points happen and then following up with however frequently that needs to be, makes some sense to have it be fluid like that. I understand, like, well, let's not let it go so long. I just want to just reiterate why we're here right now with so much water under the bridge. We made a conscious decision not to in 2019, and then the pandemic hit. So we would have been at about a 5-year point in 2019 doing this, but we stopped.
And just to,
And so, I'm sorry, yes,
to
Steve?
just
Absolutely.
put a finer nail on that or reflection, it is the transparency that developers are looking for, Councilmember Stolberg, is not, and what they're looking for from the city is not necessarily how you went into the process that you used to develop the fee. That's certainly important, and being able to evaluate your fee from time to time. But once it's set, it's not changing in the middle of their game, and their game starts when their application is filed.
Exactly, and I would advocate that the council, that be the ongoing policy. While yes, if you were to change the fee midstream in some application, you could technically say and hold that, but I don't think that's a
That's
good
not
policy,
fair.
right? And so if that can be clear, you know, that's fine. And that's why we associate this consideration with a particular fiscal year as part of the budget process, so as not to upend the development community. Oh, they decided to go in and ask to change it all of a sudden. Hey, there's plenty of warning here. You know, we start in May and things like that, so.
So Kim, then Tony, then Andres.
So as Adam said, this is a lagging indicator. Can you go back to the slide with the numbers by year? Thanks. So, you know, we raised it in May of 2008. We all know what happened in November of that
Yeah.
year, right? So then we waited, though, until 2013 to lower it
In the
again.
code, it said 5 years.
No, it didn't say 5 years in there. It just, that's what happened
That's just how long it
programmatically.
took us to do
I-
it.
Yeah, we probably should have addressed it sooner.
So I like, yeah, and now we haven't done anything with it for almost 10 years. So I like the idea of instituting a 5-year review, but having some sort of a trigger. Housing starts, to me, makes sense because that's more linked to this than any of the other indicators. And going from there, and when you look at inflation, it should be higher, not lower, because it costs more to acquire or to build a unit if there's more inflation.
I think you need to look also, though, at the cost of building the building.
Yeah, that's going to be
So
higher as
that's
well.
right.
Sure.
So you're
Yep.
trying to balance
Right,
for the math to work out for
right.
everybody.
But if you look at the amount compared to the past amounts, I think 185 seems to, or 185.4 seems to be a reasonable amount to go to at this point, as long as we look at it again in 5 years or sooner if warranted.
Tony?
Yes, two things. First of all, I would advocate reevaluating this on a more frequent basis, frankly, annually. And the reason for that is that sometimes the market is affected by housing starts, sometimes the market is affected by interest rates, sometimes the market is affected by a pandemic or an election or a myriad of other things that are unpredictable. And I think annually, it's a good idea to review it, and the decision may be, things are stable, let's not change it. But I think it allows us to make a more predictable, reasonable evaluation annually that helps to maintain an ongoing process of development. I would say, I also agree that $185,400 is reasonable right now, particularly given where things may be headed in terms of the ability to leverage other programs with the money, whether those programs are going to continue to remain available as we head into the midterms and certain kinds of things that are going on outside of the city of Highland Park that affect development.
Julie, would this be something that would be part of the annual fee review, and what kind of lead-up time would we need to provide to you? Like, where would we need to start this with the Housing Commission's recommendation to the council before it becomes part of the budget?
We started in May for this budget season. If we need to start earlier, I would defer to Julie as she leads the budget each year, but we started in May and we got to a June 1st meeting of the Housing Commission, and we're back before the council here in June before we heavily are in budget season. So
Okay.
I think it meshed well this year. Maybe we could start a month earlier. Again, I defer to the finance director on that.
Okay. Did I call on you?
It was-
I did. Andres?
Yeah, actually, my inclination, as I was listening to Councilmember Stone, was about putting a minimum of no more than 5 years, for example, or 4 years, whatever. And given, if circumstances warranted it, allowing for, stepping in and doing it sooner. Thank you. The once a year thing, my worry would be more a staff time. And I have no idea if you're on a yearly basis, your time, the Housing Commission's time, to really revisit that. I don't know if it's a heavy lift or not, but I would worry about that if it was on a yearly cadence.
I would say that, with good policy direction here from council, this could be less arduous in the future. We had a lot of misinformation and need to basically bring a lot of commissioners up to speed at the Housing Commission level, which is understandable because from time to time, the commission members change and we need to do that. As long as the method by which we approach it is agreed upon, it becomes easier each year. I'm not going to say it doesn't take any time. I might advocate for every other year, but again, I still think that periodically, based on market changes, makes a lot of sense. I wouldn't tie it to any one market indicator. I think it's got to be more of a heuristic look at generally where the housing market's going. I've done a lot of housing research in my career, and I would advocate for that. I don't think there's any magic particular indicator. And just know this also, I don't think that the fee in lieu, it's not necessarily a literal number. I would advocate. I would say that, yes, this is how we're trying to set it. But if you're a little above or below at any one time, I don't personally, as an administrator, I don't see that as a big programmatic deficiency. It's only where it gets really out of whack that becomes problematic, respectfully, in my opinion. If you'd like it every year, we, of course, will provide it every year to the council.
So I have Kim and then I have Adam, but I first have a question, and that is, I think part of the reason for this sort of separation of so many years is there was no development after the crash for a significant period of time. So I think it wasn't that it was premeditated. I think it simply was lack of need, lack of calling for.
An excellent point.
Does this question need to be reexamined? Kim?
Good point. I want to just thank you, Joel, for doing the math, because I think that has been really useful and has made this really clear. And we should be keeping this data, so it shouldn't be a big deal for us to update the spreadsheet, I would hope, every year, every couple of years, so that we can kind of revisit, and then when it looks like it's warranted to make a change, it can come to us for that discussion.
Adam?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. Joel, great work. I mean, I know this takes a lot. I was going to say something similar to what Councilperson Stone said. You know, if we say to be revisited, no more than or no less than every 5 years, certainly Julie, we all know how hard she and her team work on the budget. We're not trying to add more work to them. But I think the numbers and just the world doesn't lie. If it's a matter of a standing agenda item for the Housing Commission to take a look, they're going to real easily be able to say, nothing's changed, we're good, or this is a really crazy year, we need to dive into this. So I don't think it needs to be, as you put it out there about how we manage the expectations and the program. If it's on the agenda just to, hey, kick the tires a little bit every year, most years it's going to be, hey, I think we're in good shape. But when we see a situation like we're in today or back in 2008, that may warrant a deeper dive. And if so, we can all, including Julie's team, plan accordingly. So I don't think it has to be in-depth reviewed crazy every year and putting a tremendous amount of work on. But the numbers aren't going to lie. We're going to see if there's
a need.
But Adam, to your point, if, let's say, 4 or 5 years go by and they say, no, we kicked the tires, nothing, are we saying that on that 5th year, there will be an evaluation?
Well, I'm just speaking from my point, but I think each year is an evaluation. It just may not change. And the response to the evaluation or the recommendation from the Housing Commission may be very simple, or as we face other things like economic slowdowns or inflation or recessions or interest rate or housing permit starts or whatever it is, that discussion may get more in-depth that would warrant backing up a change either up or down in their number. So I don't think it has to be terribly in-depth. I think it just needs to be realized that developers expect this. This is money we count on. This is these scattered sites are important to our entire program, and the Housing Commission should take a look at it. And if it's status quo and they can put a one-page recommendation as to why, great. If it requires a deeper dive, we'll address it.
And I think that's fine, Mayor, and I understand the direction if that's the will of the council. We don't have a problem doing that. As long as there is cohesion about the policy approach to it, I think it becomes a lot easier. And now that we've been able to really take some programmatic information and put it into a briefing for you so you could see what really has the program done over the last 20 years, I think a lot of work is done. And that is going to be repeated each year to remind people, but not new work. And so updating the data isn't that difficult, and we can do that every year. And I just want to be clear, that would be community development doing that. We, of course, do it in the time frame that Julie sets forth for the budget process, but we don't need the finance department to do that type of analysis for us. We can do that and add to this conversation the way we're doing right now. I see no problem in that. If the council wants it each year, we'll do it.
Joel, how many sites likely do we have left in the city that would even trigger this kind of question? And that may be something you guys need to take a look at on GIS or whatever, but.
You know, the redevelopment is redevelopment. We've had, the Laurel Court 2, which was 2 buildings, and then, Barry Hammer's building, and we keep getting additional interest in our community. So,
Right.
There'll be a few. I mean, it will keep coming up as the community changes and grows. I think that, that it will. I'm not saying it's a lot.
It's an interest of ours to see how we can add to our affordable housing stocks. I just was sort of curious to know.
And then also, we have to remember that this fee in lieu, there's 2 parts to the fee in lieu in terms of who has to pay and what level of discretion it is to the council. There's the under 20 single-family detached homes has the option, a developer doing that has the option to pay in lieu by right or not at the price that's set by the council. It's for the non-single-family homes, the multifamily, the large, that's where the discretionary, the minimum is the fee in lieu in the fee schedule, and it might be something different or not. Now, traditionally, the council has not made it different. This last time around, council did direct staff to draft documents that include a fee that is higher, $150.
You reminded me of one more question I wanted to ask, and that was, do we want to have a maximum or a cap on what unit fee in lieu calculation is permissible? And by example, I mean, do you want to say up to 2, up to 1.75, in terms of where the fee in lieu is? Because I'm sure there are some who are like, I'd love to do it all, but we don't allow that. Do we want to give some direction in terms of, or is that then giving people a target and they'll always say, I'll do the 1.75 fee in lieu? So I guess that was.
Yes, I think
So
the
leave-
latter of what you said is right. I would not.
Negotiation with the Housing Commission
And the council,
And the
that's
council.
correct. And, in the past where we've given fee in lieu, we did have an acute need in the Housing Trust Fund at one point, and that was part of the reason staff had advocated to do a fee in lieu for some of the larger developments. But in other cases, I would argue that, that's also in the totality of the program something to consider. That if we're in a decent shape on the Housing Trust Fund, maybe there isn't a need for a fee in lieu, and we'd rather see the units in the development. Just something to point out. I mean, I think that that's a fluid nature, and the way the code is written, it is at the discretion of council. It is the minimum, and then you have an ability to decide on that. Again, it should be equal to or greater than what could otherwise be provided on site, et cetera, so forth, and you'll have to make that determination. It's the council's decision.
Okay. Ida had her hand up.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, if I could just interject and just share on the timing wise, and of course, certainly whatever policy decision that the council sets, we will certainly adhere to, but I guess I just want to emphasize it's not necessarily an easy task to undertake this review. Even though we will have certain criteria that we're going to review every year, we have new Housing Commission members that come on board that are going to be looking for perhaps different information and more information so they can make an informed recommendation to all of you. And so if you want us to do it every year, we certainly will, but it will certainly take time. And this is at least a 4-month process just to do an analysis and recommendations and a thoughtful review process. So if you're comfortable, I guess my suggestion is if we could do it every other year and then have that as a starting point, we can see how things shift and then certainly come back and review the policy, decision at that time.
Sounds good. Andre?
Great.
Yeah, I would be supportive of that.
And one other thing, just to leverage off of that statement that the manager said, and much appreciated, because it does require work. It doesn't happen by itself, as you know. But also, I think it's real important if this approach, if the council this is the way we approach it, we then tell the Housing Commission, guys, it's not about you want to approach it a different way. You have to stay within a certain box that the council has set, and then it becomes easier, right? Because then we don't get into debating about, well, is this the right way to approach it? And I guess that's part of the hard work that can ensue at times with commissions and so on.
Sure. Andre?
So I have a nagging question just in terms of education. The other government monies, like, so, you've pegged the number at 187, and then that's what we're saying, thank you, is what we would ask for the developers to do. But where do the other government monies come? Like when, we go out by SEPA or others to get more money to help build that house or subsidize it. So how does that factor into this conversation?
Well, the 185.4 is the total government subsidy from all sources. That's how it factors in. Our subsidy, ourselves, has been $67,500 per unit. But the total government subsidy on average has been 185.4. So that's the difference. SEPA is able to, through our grant making, leverage the delta between 185 and 67.5. Forgive me, I don't have the number on the top of my head, but the point is that's the leverage. And so those come from Lake County, the state, Lake County, that type, through the community development block grant monies that are allocated from the feds. That's where that's really coming from.
Right.
Yeah.
Adam?
Yeah, just Joel, these numbers are fantastic. One question. I think you said at 125,000, we leverage 1.85 units.
Correct.
So at 100
At the 67.5.
at the same ratio.
Correct.
So at the 184.5, has anyone done the math? And are we expecting that to give us more buying power at a 2-point-something plus? Obviously taking into account increased construction costs and everything else, carrying costs, but assuming all the grants are equal, is this a 1 + 1 = 3 for the fund?
Well, depending on what we realize in terms of leverage in the future. And why I say that is because, as we made mention in the memo and in this slide, you could see that we have been, since 2018, leveraging 67.5. That's likely to change based on input from SEPA, who's expert in leveraging these funds.
Meaning going up.
Yeah, that they're not going to be able to hold it down that
So
low.
so that's what I'm trying to, almost from an inflationary standpoint, does 185 still give us, 1.85?
Yes, and
Okay.
what 185 would give us is 2.18 at an $85,000 per unit.
At a 67 ratio.
No, at an 85,000 ratio. If you want to find from a 67, I can tell you that, just a second. 2.74, 2.75.
Okay, so it leaves room for, we still come out in good shape, even if the ratio changes.
You're still higher than the 185 now.
That was what I was asking. Thank you very much.
Thank you for this comprehensive conversation about
Thank
this
you, Mayor.
really
Really
important topic.
Great job,
Appreciate
Joel.
it.
Thank you.
Great job. Thank
Thank
you. And with that, we have no closed session, right? So, yes, Andres?
What, should we do a straw poll about the proposal, or no?
The amount?
The amount?
Well, I almost want to have our full council here to have that conversation. What are your thoughts?
I don't want to speak for other council members. It seems like everybody is relatively in favor of this, but I know Michelle is very involved in this. Out of respect, I think we should have a full council before we
I agree.
set a policy.
Given the amount of time that she spent on
Yeah.
housing, I'd like
Yeah.
to have her input as well. So, okay, so I don't know what that looks like. If we come back to this at the next committee of the whole, I'll ask that she take a watch of this conversation, and then we can hopefully have a, 15, 30-minute max.
Just a quick question on that, if I
Sure.
may. So let's say we do adopt this. Are we, when we change this, are we looking, and maybe it's a question for Joel or Julie, and back to developer clarity and expectation, does it become effective mid-year, or are we looking at things to change it
January 1.
effective beginning of fiscal
I
Our
know
year?
the
intent
answer
was
from
January
Julie. We
1.
keep it.
January 1, right? I just want, that's what I thought. I just wanted to make,
Can you imagine the fiasco?
I'm seeing her face, but that's why I just wanted
You
to
could-
put it out there.
You could adopt it as soon as you come to a consensus.
Correct.
But have a
But then
delayed
each
effective date.
year.
But it wouldn't be effective immediately. It would be, I saw your face, Julie. I wouldn't do that to you.
It doesn't impact my organization.
Right. Joel's got that look on his face.
Yes. Just wanted to make sure we were all understanding.
Yeah, and that, as part of a regular process, I think that lends to consistency and fair warning and other types of things, as opposed to it's
Completely
changing
agree.
next month, and everyone's like, whoa!
Just wanted to make sure we were all on the same page. I agree 100%, Joel.
Yeah.
Okay.
1,000. Okay, great, awesome, thank you.
Right.
And so with that, I'm seeking a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
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 Joel, that was great. Thank you.
Have a good night.
You,
I know that's not easy stuff.
That was a great presentation.
thank you, I appreciate it.